All right, welcome back to the Value Add Show. Today we've got my brother-in-law, Collin Akers, on the show. He's a Zoom's top-performing sales rep. I'm proud to say I'm undefeated against him in all family games. Also golf, hasn't been able to take me down on that one either. But no, Colin's, he's a great mind, thinks big. Excited to have him on today. Colin, how's it going?
Hey, appreciate it, Jake. I didn't know you were just straight up lying on these podcasts now. We already know I beat you last summer in that round of golf. Where'd we play? It was not Maple Bluff, but
yeah, somewhere in the Quad Cities there.
Yeah. So, but I appreciate the intro. But yeah, we'll see. We can play more games whenever you want. But thanks for having me.
Has Jacob ever told you our golf story?
No.
Okay, Jacob. No, that'll be off camera. But
yeah,
I took him for some big bucks last year.
No way.
But he doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Was he placing the bets?
I'll tell you later. What's that?
Was he placing the bets?
I think so. We just ran him up. It was bad.
That's the theme with Jake. I love that about Jake. It's kind of good, especially if you're at an advantageous position, because he'll just double down on the bets, and then you can just take it money. But you got to cool him off, because otherwise he goes home empty pocketed. So
I know that's what happened that day. He's
awesome.
Still feeling
Cool.
that one.
Well, yeah, Colin, let's get into your story. Maybe tell everybody where you're at now, and then we can kind of work backwards.
Cool. Yeah. Well, currently work for Zoom. Been with Zoom for about 2 years professionally. I'm a commercial account manager, so I sell to organizations between the sizes of 250 to 1,000 employees. My fiance and I, we were living in Hawaii during COVID, pretty much figured the island was a good place to ride out the storm. And we recently moved to Florida. So we're in Florida, getting ready to get married next month, and then, lay our roots, lay our groundwork there and go from there. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah, that's exciting. So was it California, then Boston, then Australia, Hawaii, and then now Florida? Is that kind of the trip?
It was Boston first,
Okay.
mainly just for sales training at my first employer, TechTarget. Right out of school, got that job, thankfully to a friend of mine who really got me into the interview process, and then got there, and that was meant to be a sales role. And really the position was to be hired to be in California. So I went to Boston for 2 months, then transferred out to California, lived in San Francisco for right around 2 years, and then was also asked to go to Australia to help build out the Asia Pacific business for TechTarget. So went and lived in Sydney for 3, and then, COVID hit. Things got a little scary, and Lindsay and I figured we might as well get a little bit closer to home. So that's why we, landed in Hawaii.
That's awesome.
TechTarget. What's that?
Yeah, TechTarget, they sell purchase intent data. So basically what they're doing is they're monitoring people, mainly IT buyers who are doing pre-purchase research. Things like, hey, I got to update my cloud data center next month or next year. Let me figure out what the right solution is. So they're doing online research, kind of like we do if we're looking for new houses or looking for new cars. So they're monitoring all that data, and then we turn around, capture that data, and then sell it to marketers or sales individuals at those technology companies. So it's a pretty powerful value prop, because it's like, hey, look, sales rep, you're trying to sell security solutions. Would it be helpful if I could deliver you 200 people that are actively looking for security solutions right now? And here's their information. Here's the topics that they're looking on. You now take this information and proceed with your sales process. That's what TechTarget does at a high level.
So where's TechTarget getting their data?
So they own like 150-ish sites, and they have an in-house editorial team. So I think they've got upwards of 1,000. It's probably much more now. I left about 2 years ago. They were constantly growing their editorial staff, and that editors, their job is to be experts in certain technology spaces, and they're constantly pumping out content. So I forget what the numbers are, but it's buku numbers. I mean, these guys are releasing hundreds of thousands of articles a year, and then those articles are basically what fuels the data machine of what we then turn around and sell.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, this company is creating, when you say articles, is it like blogs to figure out who's looking at like home security, for example? Then they're getting these people to go to their blogs. They're capturing that information, and then they're selling that data to ADT or whatever the company is, and saying, hey, we have 1,000 people a day looking at home security. Here's their information.
Yep. Bingo. And the the good value prop of TechTarget is that all of their content is very project oriented. So they're writing stuff that is very hyper focused. It's not something that you would be like browsing when you're on the subway heading into work or on your car. Like, it's very intense articles that really you would only be reading it if you were trying to figure out a problem or solve a problem or plan for an upcoming IT project. So that's kind of what always helped us as sales reps. It's like, hey, look, we're not just selling you leads. We're not just giving you names. We're actually giving you names and emails and information of people that are reading very intense articles, pages, or 3-4 pages long, of diving into, the best threat management solutions for small businesses, something very specific like that. So that's TechTarget produces very project oriented content, which then in return produces much better data that we could sell. Cause obviously, there's a big difference. For example, let's say I'm a sales rep and I sell a cloud solution, right? And some of our competitors, TechTarget's competitors, would drop just cookies on different articles out there, and that's how they would capture data. But that article could be talking about actual clouds, right? Like physical clouds. It could be a weather article, right? And that's not very helpful, because if I'm an IT individual and I'm looking at what the weather is going to be like in St. Petersburg next Wednesday, and it mentions cloud, and then therefore it puts me in the bucket of, I'm looking at cloud. That's not the reality. So TechTarget focuses on basically making sure that all of the articles are very intense and project oriented. And then therefore the data that we're selling is much more actionable, because these are real people looking at very project oriented content.
Colin, this is a little off topic, but while you're talking, I remembered, since this is a business show, didn't you basically take a frat from nothing and basically build a business? You built a frat. I guess, could you touch on that?
Yeah, that's true. So basically, in college, I went my freshman year to University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. It's where I met one of my best friends, John White. He's going to soon to be my best man. And him and I both went up there to go wrestle. We both ended up just not really liking the college. Wasn't for us. So we transferred down to SIUE, Southern Illinois University of Edwardsville. And my sophomore year, I started getting just hit up by other people, whether it be on campus or at parties, things like that. And they're like, hey, you should join the fraternity. You should join a fraternity. And I was thinking, I was like, yeah, it's kind of cool, but like, I'm not super excited about that. It's not really my style. And then someone, it might have even been my girlfriend at the time and a few of my other friends, were like, hey, you know what? You should just start one. Like, just start your own. And I was like, is that possible? Like, can you do that? And so I started Googling it just out of fun and out of curiosity. It's just kind of like a weird topic that was on my mind for a few days. Figured out that you can actually start your own fraternity. Reached out to a few that I aligned with, their vision, their strategy, all the stuff that they do. I liked. Reached out to a couple. One of them got back to me while I was in Florida, and they're like, hey, we're very interested. We actually really want to expand in the Midwest, and SIUE is on our map. So if you want to lead this, let's rock and roll. So I was like, done. Let's do this thing. Signed it up. Basically, they gave me like this step-by-step process and how you do it. And that was where I was kind of at a crossroads, because essentially the plan, and really historically for Kappa Sigma, that was the fraternity that I started. Well, I should say chapter. I didn't start the whole fraternity, chapter at SIUE. Essentially, it's about a 2-year process, right? And I was, I think, going into my junior year. And I'm like, all right, well, I could start this thing, and, hopefully if I complete it, I'm going to be just at graduation, so I don't know if I'm going to get much benefit out of it myself, but it still might be cool to start it. So I started kind of flipping through the pages. This book, it was like this big book, kind of this like guide of all the things you got to do. And I just started kind of ripping it apart, re-putting it together in different pieces. I'm like, okay, this step could maybe be done at the same time as this step. If we could get all of these approvals at the same time, then that's going to put us this way. So long story short, we ended up, rather than doing it in 2 years, we did it in like 6 months. So I built it from an idea from, me to then about 72 individuals. We got all the way through colonization, which is like the first step. Then you get to become official chapter, did all that. And then we were off to the races. So I think about halfway through my junior year, we were ready to rock and roll. We were actually, I think, the second largest fraternity on campus at that point. The nice thing is that I was able to recruit a bunch of guys that typically probably wouldn't join a fraternity. It was actually ended up being athletics is a lot of my background. And so a lot of athletes who were just like looking to have a lot of fun and saw a bunch of camaraderie and we're looking to kind of build on that. And so not only did we get so big, but then we just started crushing every competition. I mean, like they have flag football. They've got these like gladiator competitions. They've got IFC week. They've got all these other things. And so we just started just cleaning up on the awards and the accolades. And so fast forward about halfway through my senior year, at that point, we had just won everything. We were the biggest on campus. Every sorority was like, hey, we want to hang out with you guys. We were throwing the best parties. It was just a wild ride. It was a lot of fun. And obviously, I kind of had the starting idea, but it was really 60 to 70 people that got it done. These guys that had the same mindset and the same goal that just started chasing it down. It was really cool.
So did you have a house for that? Or was it, there's no frat house?
Yeah. And so it was like, yes and no. We, Edwardsville, the town that SIUE is, they've got rules basically to limit fraternity and sorority expansion. So it's actually like a really old brothel rule, a law, I should say, that only X amount of people without the same last name can live under the same roof. So essentially, no one could have like a big, like you see at like University of Iowa or University of Wisconsin, big fraternity houses. But we did have 4 or 5 where everyone that was in that house was a part of the fraternity. And so therefore, like, that's where the parties usually take place and things like that. But I do wish
Nice.
I would go to other campuses and you step into these like $8 million mansions that have been paid for by the alumni, and they've got cooks and they've got cleaners and they've got gyms and all this other crazy stuff. And you're just like, man, this is next level. But we didn't have that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it honestly relates a ton to business because you took a system, it was a 2-year system, and you just found a way to go into the marketplace and do it more efficient and do it better. And you did it in 6 months. I just think that's awesome. And that's, essentially business.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, again, obviously we had a team, and I had 5 of us on an exec membership, and we kind of worked this together to trying to rebuild this thing so it could be done correctly. But there was a really cool moment. I mean, Kappa Sigma does national conclaves every year where people come together, and usually it's in Vegas, and there will be like 1,200 Kappa Sigma members from different chapters there. And I actually had a chance to speak about that because they were like, hey, this is the fastest in Kappa Sigma history that anyone has gone from colonization to being a full chapter in the shortest amount of time frame. So we'd like you to elaborate on how you did that. And I don't know if that, led to them rewriting the book or rebuilding it, but I think the key point was that there was a lot of fluff and then probably just a lot of like unnecessary steps that were probably just fell on upon by default because hey, this is how it's always done, and sort of challenging that status quo, changing it a little bit, trying to see it with a new vision. And I didn't know if it was going to work. I mean, we could have totally failed, but somehow we pulled off. Probably a lot of luck, but yeah.
So what kind of hazing did you guys do?
No hazing. No hazing. You know that.
No hazing?
No hazing. That can get you in a lot of trouble these days. And actually, we took that very seriously. I didn't have any, in my opinion, in terms of selection of individuals, I wanted standout gentlemen, people that were, you were proud to be around. We wanted people that had like mindsets, top achievers, typically athletic backgrounds. That kind of naturally happened. I didn't really have any interest in hazing, but we did have a pretty strong mandate in terms of, hey, like, this is the type of guys that we want involved, and here's what we're doing at a high level. And if you want to be a part of that and you're going to be a positive contribution, awesome. Like, let's rock and roll. And we had all walks of life, very different guys. We had one gentleman, we named him Blue. At the time, I think he was in his 50s, 60s, maybe not 60s. That might be too high, but 40s, 50s, which is obviously unordinary. Most people are 19, 20, 21, 22. But he fit the profile. He was a great addition, and he brought a lot to the table. So no hazing, but if you didn't fit the mandate or you couldn't keep up to it, then we would walk the door, and we let people go, and that was kind of a part of it.
That's an awesome story. Let's get into. I'd love to hear your journey in sales. What was kind of the first step at TechTarget, like pounding the pavement? Like, I really want to hear the grind of it, and how that led to where you're at today.
Yeah, that's the meat. That's where the fun stuff happens, and that's probably where a lot of the fat gets trimmed, to be honest. So going to the very beginning, I graduate college. I'm going through a series of interviews. Like most people, I'm like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I've got a business degree and a minor in international political science. I thought maybe I would like to go down the political route. I actually worked on a political campaign for a little bit. And then I was like, nope, this is not for me. So, I'm reaching out to some of my networks. My father actually reached out to one of my old wrestling partners, Ryan Warner, and he was working at TechTarget at that time. And he's like, hey, this is a great program, great for, starters. They've got a great training program and really good for people that want to build from the ground up. So I got an interview, got into that. And then, you go to Boston, you do sales training. It's about 2 months, crash course, right? And after that, they're like, all right, here's your territory. And usually, and this is typically how it starts in sales, is you, especially in the software industry, you start at the very bottom, and you're, typically at either what they call an SDR or a BDR. And your job is to just make calls. And your job is to make the calls, create interest, set appointments for the AEs. At the time, TechTarget wasn't, it was a pretty big organization, but their sales structure was still building out. So you actually got to kind of bypass that. Granted, you still had to be your own BDR and your SDR, but I didn't necessarily have to spend 5 or 6 months of just straight dialing and calling for someone else. I did have to do it for myself. And then that's really where the fun happens, right? Is you kind of, like, that's what I mean by trimming the fat. You realize who's in it and who's not in it, and which is okay. Everything's for everyone, things are different for people. But basically, I got to San Francisco. They give me about 200 accounts. And we're talking like these are accounts that no one's dialed for 2 years, right? Like I don't even know if the phone numbers probably don't work. The emails are dead, all this nonsense. And your job is just to make it happen, stay afloat or sink. And so you're just grinding. You're just emailing, calling. And, I've got some really good stories of me and my roommate at the time going in on Sundays. We would usually go watch football and then go into the office Sunday evening, and we'd start just pre-typing emails. We'd have about 100 emails ready to go, or we'd start building out our prospecting list for Monday, or doing whatever we need to do to make Monday and Tuesday as effective as possible. And it's funny because we stunk. Like I sucked at sales, like I was just, you're nervous. You got a lot of anxiety. You're doubting yourself. You go from college where, everyone's your best friend and you're partying and everything's great. And you're also like a senior. You're so natural. You feel great about yourself, to all of a sudden I'm calling 40-year-olds, who are IT directors. And I'm like this 20-year-old who like doesn't know what to say or doesn't know what to do. I mean, the amount of times like people would pick up finally and I'd hang up immediately because I panicked. And, so you stumble and fall and stumble and fall and stumble and fall. And then all of a sudden, like one thing works. And then you're like, oh, okay, that kind of works. So you kind of double down on that. And then you just keep building and building. And really, that was the first 2 years at TechTarget, was just trying to figure out what worked for me, and, build my confidence a little bit, cool the nerves a little bit, get a little bit more calm and collected. And then finally, things start to click, and then you can really start to build upon that. But a lot of people you'll see like will do that, and that first 8 or 9 months is, kind of a breaking point. Like you're like, this isn't something that I really want to be a part of. This isn't really the grind that I'm in on. And so they go find something else, which again is okay, but that happens a lot.
I think that relates a lot to real estate. I know me and Drew have cold called owners before. I know Drew's mentioned for rent signs. And yeah, it's nerve wracking calling somebody you don't know, especially when you're young, and calling a 40-year-old, hey, I want to buy your house. Hey, I want to buy your apartment building. Hey, I want to sell you this. I don't know, Drew, if you want to touch on that a little bit, but I think it's very relatable.
Yeah, I mean, it's just repetitions. I think the hardest part for me was usually just picking up the phone and actually dialing the number. And then after you do it a few times, you talk to some people, you get more comfortable, and then it kind of just comes together. But yeah, it certainly takes time, because those first couple of calls, you're kind of just stumbling through. Yeah. And you really learn as you go, and then you kind of get a system down. And then once you get comfortable with it, then it's kind of enjoyable, and you can start knocking out calls and really working yourself through those conversations. But yeah, starting out is certainly, there's a lot of training you can do on it, but you really don't learn until you start talking to these people. Because a lot of them, especially when you're trying to make sales calls, I used to work for an insurance company, and we were calling people. I mean, it's basically like you open up the directory or the phone book, and you're just calling these people. And we would call and see if they needed insurance. And, usually, hey, this is Drew from, State Farm. I'm just calling to see if you may be interested in, getting a new quote for your auto insurance. And 98% of the time, they're basically like, screw off, I don't want to talk to you. And then you start getting those 2%. It's really just a numbers game, especially when you're just dialing for dollars. And the leads that you were getting, were those people that had originally like maybe shown some interest before that you can reference, or was it just random people that they had numbers for?
Yeah, it's I know what you mean. I agree with you. What you're saying, it's definitely a numbers game. At some point, like if you call enough people, you're going to stumble across someone that's going to want to talk to you. And that's still today in my world that I live in. It's still the same thing. Yes. So how it worked at TechTarget and how it also works at Zoom in my territory is they call it account based. So I had at TechTarget 200 organizations that were in my name. And if we have a CRM system that can show historical engagements, or if we had closed won opportunities, closed loss opportunities, those are good data points to use because to your point, Drew, it's like, all right, we had some previous interest here, or in fact, we actually signed a contract with these guys 18 months ago. They didn't renew for whatever reason, but I can, use that. But then at the same time, people are constantly moving companies. The IT director that might have signed that deal 2 years ago probably has moved on. And so now all of a sudden I'm back to ground zero. Yes, I have the account and I've got the historical data, but I don't have anyone that I need to talk to. So that's where, LinkedIn and LinkedIn Sales Navigator and all these other, prospecting tools come into play because you got to figure out like, hey, okay, I got to go find the right person to talk to. And then a lot of salespeople will tell you this too. The best salespeople in the world are typically the best prospectors. They're constantly finding new individuals to talk to, new people to put in the funnel. And even if you're working on, smaller, larger accounts, because usually as you grow up in the hierarchy of sales, your territory gets smaller, but you're working with bigger organizations. And so then at that point, even though you might have 20 organizations in your territory, like my days at TechTarget towards the end, I still need to find 15 or 16 people, different departments. For example, I used to sell into IBM when I worked at TechTarget in Sydney, Australia. And they were a huge spender with us. But at the same time, it wasn't just like one person that was cutting the checks. There was different departments across Asia Pacific, Singapore and India and Australia, and even within Australia, different departments. So finding those people, trying to get their phone number, trying to get their email, trying to get their attention. Those are all part of it. And that's definitely in the early days, a big portion of it because, you have these accounts, but at the same time, the information could be wrong or it could be dead ends. That person might not be at the company anymore and you got to go figure that out.
Colin, could you touch on kind of your approach in sales? Are you finding, people's pain points? I mean, how do you find those? Because I know in the business me and Drew are in, we've got half the people are on Microsoft, the other half are using Google Meet, and it's kind of like this. I guess that would be a pain point for us. I guess how do you find those pain points in business, and what's your approach to ultimately close that deal?
Yeah. So there's a lot there. So I would say overall, if you're talking, I break sales down, at least for myself. I like to keep things simple, but I break it down in like 3 buckets. Versus mindset, like how I'm approaching my day, how I'm approaching just the overall quota, how I'm thinking in a day-to-day basis. And that's something else I can touch on a little bit later. Then what you're kind of talking about is like more in the 3rd bucket, which is execution. So after I've gotten someone to want to talk to me, now it's really, okay, how do we execute this deal? How do we create interest? How do we move this along? How do we, really ultimately lead ourselves to a close? And to your point, it is pain points. It's always pain points. Like I like to kind of say, like, you can't catch a fish without a hook. Like if you're out there fishing in the river and you don't have a hook at the end of that, like you're not going to catch anything, right? Even if you have bait, it's just going to bite it and slip off. Same with like buyers, anyone you're trying to sell to. If you don't have a hook, which is primarily a pain point, even if you've got the best product or if you've got the best features or you've got the best price, it doesn't really matter if you're not sitting there solving someone's pain point and providing a solution to that pain point. I would say 9 out of 10 times they're not migrating onto whether your solution or moving with you, because the problem is you always have the incumbent, which is basically to not change. And people will be like, oh, well, that's all. It takes work to change. And if I'm not really solving a pain that I'm having right now, then I'm not really necessarily that motivated. Now, the pain could be cost. It could be like, hey, I'm spending way too much and you guys are going to cut my expenses by 45%. Like that's a pain to me. Okay, let's move on that. But if it's just cost alone or if it's just features, usually that doesn't get the job done. So the way you get that done is just good question asking, open-ended questions, trying to understand someone's pain points, and really going a couple levels deep. Like not just like, hey, what are you guys', what do you like about your current solution? What don't you like about your current solution? but really like, hey, what are your top initiatives for this year? Why are those initiatives important to you? If you don't hit those initiatives, what's going to happen? Like getting a couple layers deep into each question usually is where you can start to get some really good hooks. And then later, the song and the dance of sales is using those hooks and tying it back to your solutions. And if you can do that in a smooth process, you can be very successful. And I would say that, there's a lot of different ways to approach sales. And I've got a lot of my friends who are just absolute savages, and they are so much better at different things than I am. But Jake, I think I told you this before, but do you guys know who like the best salespeople in the world are? If you can take a guess.
I don't know. Maybe.
Just take a guess, I guess.
I mean, I would think like Elon Musk is a great salesperson.
Okay. Yeah.
And he's unique, but he does a great job selling what he's producing.
I guess the best salespeople are the people you know, like, and trust.
Yeah, okay. Those are fair. Elon Musk, I agree with that. I'm a big fan of Elon Musk. This guy's the man. Like even to a point of probably selling a little too much, getting himself in trouble with the SEC and whatnot. But he's the guy.
You're a Tesla guy too, aren't you, Colin? You
Oh yeah, big fan. Yep, big fan. Yep, picked one of those up a few months ago. No, in my opinion, right, and this isn't factual, but this is my opinion, the best salespeople in the world are doctors, right? And it's mainly because of what I was just telling you about. If you think about like your engagement with a doctor, it's, you walk in and the first thing is like, hey, what's going on with you? Like, why are we here today? Tell me a little bit about what you're experiencing or feeling. And you're like, oh, like my elbow's a little bit tweaked, or like my stomach's not really feeling well. And obviously we trust doctors 99% of the time. And so we're very open about that. So they do have a little bit of an upper hand in terms of bypassing and having trust automatically. But the first thing they do is they understand your pain points, right? Like they try to figure out what's going on with you, and then they prescribe a solution, right? Typically a prescription. And granted, they're not necessarily taking your check from you, but you are taking that prescription, going over, filling it at Walgreens or CVS or whatever it might be. And, the pharmaceutical world is a huge market. So in my opinion, they're the best doctors because they've honed in on this process of understanding your pain points, listening to it, using their expertise, and then prescribing a solution. And so for my goal, whenever I go into a situation, is kind of have that doctor mindset, like, hey, like, what are your pain points? Let me, understand those deeply. Okay, let me use my expertise of tying it back to Zoom, and then let me prescribe a solution that could work for you guys. And then if we can work and it's a win-win, boom. So
yeah,
I'm not sure if you guys
that.
agree with that or not, but that's something that's been in my head for about 2 years.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that brings me back to when I was getting started into real estate on the student housing side. We were building a project in Iowa City, and this was 3 or so years ago. And that was kind of before all of these new projects came to town, where we had the pools and every unit had its own bedroom bathroom ratio and washers and dryers. And I was in a position where I would have to actually drive these tenants or these prospects, and mostly students, from downtown Iowa City, which is where we had a leasing office, to the property, which is like a 15-minute drive. Wow. And so I was usually making that drive. So I had 30 minutes in the car with them alone. And I was making that drive usually 10 times a day. And that gave me, I got really good at sales during that time, because that 15-minute drive down to the property, I could ask them basically all of their pain points of where they're currently living. And a lot of them were freshmen in dorms. So I would always say, I knew what their pain points were before they would tell me, but I would always ask them, because then it would click in their head like, oh, like, yeah, that would be great. I don't have to live in a bedroom with 2 other people and share a bathroom with, 10 other people. And so I got really good at making sure they realize their pain points going into the showing. Nice. And also with the way Iowa City housing was, there's a lot of older housing where they didn't have washers and dryers in the units, and, they definitely didn't have their own bathroom. And so, or any amenities like the pools and the clubhouse and the gym. And so when I would go down there, I would always ask them, where do you live? What's it like? Do you have your own bathroom? Is there a washer and dryer? And then I would also get into, we had tanning beds. So, a lot of girls in Iowa City would go tanning. And so I would say, well, you don't have to pay that $20 a month, or you don't have to pay that $50 a month gym fee. Boom. And once I got out to the site, it was the easiest sale ever, because I basically would check off all of their pain points before they even, before I knew they were checked off, before they even realized it. And then they would get there, like, this is the best thing ever. And so that was a huge advantage for me getting into it. And and basically being able to check off all of those boxes for them.
Drew, did you have like leases printed off on the right back? Just having
No, so
everybody
we
sign
did
them?
all electronic, but I think my closing rate was like 70% because it was so easy for me to get them out. Once I got them in the car and got them out to the site and showed them basically everything they wanted to see. And then I had 15 minutes back to basically explain the whole process to them. They would almost always sign the day of the showing just because, they were comfortable with it and it checked all of the boxes they needed and it was easy for me to sell it to them. So I learned a ton about sales in that process.
That's awesome that you did that too, because like that's the perfect recipe, right? Especially in that situation, because like you said, like you could have spent that 15 minutes just rambling on about how great the property is, and maybe it still would have closed because if their situation wasn't as great. But the fact that you're taking that time to get them to basically sell themselves on what they don't like about it, and then obviously you're going to walk through something physical, so it's like you don't even have to like re-establish their pain points. They already know. They just reconfirmed to you and to themselves verbally, and all of a sudden they're seeing their own laundry unit, they're seeing the tanning beds, they're seeing the amenities. It's like boom, and you could have obviously taken the other route, and this is something that I did incorrectly in the beginning. Is you get on a call and you're so excited, and my Siri just turned on for some reason. You just start showing all your features. You're just like, hey, look at this and look at this and look at this and look at that. And like no one wants to be sold. Like no one wants to have something shove on them. And the fact that you took that time to be like, hey, like, tell me about what you don't like and tell me what your problems are. And then they can just rediscover the fact that what you're providing is significantly better. Bingo. I mean, That's a done deal. You can just be cleaning up every day.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And if they already had a washer and dryer, I wouldn't spend a lot of time, showing the washer and dryer, for example, because that was already something they had. It wasn't a pain point.
Yep.
So I would always just make sure and reference all of the pain points they had. And if you spend time with them, especially in a car when you're driving out there, they're pretty open, especially college kids, and I was just graduated. So
yeah,
I mean, we could relate on almost everything. And so it made it was great. It was an easy sale for me. So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
So, Colin, we talked about kind of closing the deal, finding the pain point. I'd love to touch on, you said commercial. How many employees is that? You said 200?
250 to 1,000, yep.
So 250 to 1,000. Are you going after like CEOs of these companies? Or are you going after like CFOs? I guess, who's the guy you look for? And at a company of that size, how do you even get in touch with somebody like that?
Yeah, good question. Pretty much, yes, it's everyone, right? Like especially if you're rolling out, for example, Zoom sells Zoom Phone, right? Very important piece to our business. And typically if a company has, they only have one phone solution, right, for the entire organization. So if you're working on a Zoom Phone deal, you're working on a big project. It's gonna touch every single employee. So you're looking at a decision that's going to impact about 1,000 people if you're at the upper end. And so when you're dealing with those, you've got CFOs involved, CTOs, CIOs, CEOs. Typically, the first line for us is either VP of IT or IT director, sometimes IT manager too, depends on how robust the organization is. So that's usually your starting point, because that will be the guy that's tasked with moving the project or evaluating the project. Okay, hey, we've decided we're going to change our phone system. Jerry, we need you to go look at 6 different phone systems, narrow it down to 3, and then let's do some testing on the 3. So that's usually where you're starting. But typically throughout the deal process, you'll then have to connect with the CFO, because the CFO always wants to come in after you've been chosen and you've done the evaluation. Then CFO wants to get involved to do the numbers and usually try to break down the rate a little bit. CTO is usually the biggest decision maker. And then sometimes you'll have the CEO involved. Depends on how involved he is in terms of like IT decisions, but he'll want to come in and be like, all right, is this a good decision for our business? And every time you're meeting with these individuals, you got to go through the same process, because these guys have different priorities, right? CEO is like, hey, I want to make sure our business is as profitable as possible and growing as fast as possible. CTO is like, hey, I got to update all of these systems and make sure that we're very secure when we're doing this, because my CEO is trying to scale as quickly as possible. CFO is like, hey, I need to make sure that our numbers are as tight as possible, because I want to cut down costs and I want to make us as profitable as possible. So every time you're meeting with these people, you're going through rediscovery, kind of to Drew's point. You got to rebuild the pain points and re-understand the pain points, so that then when you're at the final yard line, you can present it to each one of them and be like, Mr. X, I know that you care about this, and this is what the solution is going to do to solve this. And, Mr. Y, this is what it's going to be, and blah, blah, blah. Getting engaged with them can happen a couple of different ways. Sometimes, some reps are really good at getting the CEO's attention right away, right? Like start the process, and you can have a really high success rate. If you can start at the top, then usually you'll get kicked down, but now you're coming from the top down, right? And that's actually how I was very fortunate to close a significantly large deal at the beginning of the year. And that was how that started. I had a great narrative. I knew what their pain points were. I had discovered them by meeting with people throughout the organization at the base level. And I had built a really good story, really being like, I know your problems. I know that you're experiencing these pain points, and I've got a solution that's going to save you money, give you better security, give you a better experience, and make your lives easier. Once I had built that story, I just went straight to the top. CFO, CTO, CIO. And eventually it was actually the CFO that responded first. I was like, hey, thank you. Can you grab this data point and send it to me? Grabbed it, sent it. He's like, awesome. We'll be in touch. I shared this with our CIO. 2 weeks later, CIO is like, hey, Colin, I need to meet with you. Let's start this conversation. So, if you can build a good narrative and provide a solution right out of the gate, you can have a good, chance of getting a response from someone high up. Now, if I'm leading with like features and I'm just like filling the inbox of the CEO and I'm like, hey, you guys should really take on Zoom because XYZ reason and blah, 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 almost never a response. Waste of time. In fact, it might even hurt you because if you continue to hammer that individual, usually you can build a bad stigma. So whenever I'm going to the top, it's always got to be, I've done my homework. I know why I'm reaching out. I know a little bit about them. And, it's worth you taking a look at this because I'm genuinely trying to solve a problem that I know that you're already experiencing.
That's awesome. And that big sale you mentioned, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that puts you like 352% over your number for the year. And I think Michael Phelps actually presented you with an award in 2021. I don't know if you want to touch on that at all.
Yeah. Well, Zoom does a great job. They've got, they look after their employees really well. So they always are, doing fun things to, make us feel special. And that was awesome. So yeah, they brought on Michael Phelps during our one of our growth summits, which is like an all hands type year end review. And that was when I had won the award, top performing sales rep. And he was there to announce it all. So it's kind of cool. Michael Phelps, obviously one of the greatest Olympians of all time, sort of talking a little bit about you and your achievements and whatnot. It did. Yeah. It, shattered the quota, which is always fun because then you get to play around in, 2X, 3X commission land, which is fun. But yeah, that was, that deal was a blast because it ended up resetting or set the new record for the largest deal ever sold at commercial segment for Zoom. And, but, obviously there's a lot of luck too. Like I was at the right place, right time. I had a really good narrative. I had discovered their pain points, kind of going through the process that we talked about. And, a lot of it is, or not a lot of it, but some of it is a good portion of luck. They were at the same time, the CEO actually was hating the current system. Right. So, I had a lot of high level support that was already coming in organically without me having to go through the very hard steps of selling and building that. So, that's something that it just happens randomly and you just got to be there to capitalize when it does.
So I want to get into COVID because I'm sure that played a big part in Zoom's growth with everybody working from home. But as far as the other players in the market, I guess when you're reaching out to these companies, what two other companies are they using as far as like video conferencing? What are the other two big players?
So basically, when you look at the video conferencing market, you've got the big incumbent, which is WebEx. And funny story too, like Zoom, the founder of Zoom, Eric Yuan, and his team, they created WebEx long time ago. And I think maybe early 2000s, maybe late 90s, but I think early 2000s. And then they sold it to Cisco, right? And Cisco acquired it. They took it, built it, became a huge business. I mean, I still think to today, they own like 42% of the video conferencing market, like something very vast. And basically what happened was Eric was understanding with where video conferencing was going, where internet was going, how we would use, certain different aspects of architecture, which is way over my head. But he basically went to Cisco and was like, hey, WebEx isn't built for the future. We need to shut it down. Let us rebuild it and re-enter the market so it's a much better product. And basically they were like, no, we're not going to do that. Like it's not broken. Let's not try to fix it. We're not going to shut it down. So Eric walks out of that meeting, secretly grabs about 100 engineers, and they leave, walk out, and they go dark. They go dark for like 2 years, and they start building what is now Zoom. And Zoom, and hence why Zoom has had so much success. They basically fixed the problems that the market leader had organically in their system and went back into market and just started crushing it. Obviously, COVID took us from, hockey sticked us in terms of growth. But to answer your question, you've got WebEx, which is the big incumbent. You've got Teams, Microsoft Teams, which is probably the next biggest. Teams is a really big problem for us. Not primarily from a solution standpoint. Like I always urge testing. Like if people are like, hey, well, we're thinking about Teams or we're thinking about Zoom. I'm like, all right, let's do a head-to-head test. Let's get 20 people on each system and you guys test it out. And then you let us know what the feedback is. And if we can do a test and stay on top of it, we'll win that deal because Zoom is just a superior product. It's easier to use. It's more reliable. It's got better quality. And if you're an organization that's got 1,000 people working from home, like you really can't understand the business impact of people not effectively being able to collaborate and work together. That's very important. Now, Teams is also quote unquote free because when you buy Office 365, which everyone has, so you have PowerPoint, Excel, and Outlook and all of that, Teams is lumped into that. So you're really, Microsoft is eating, or not eating, but being a really difficult market competitor for us because of the fact that they're willing to just eat the cost. They're going to make their money on their cloud solutions and their security solutions and on Microsoft Office 365, and they'll just put Teams out there for free. So that's a difficult environment to work with because you've got an IT director that's like, okay, I can go Zoom and it's going to cost me X amount of dollars, or I can just roll out Teams and it's going to, essentially I'm already paying for it. So that's a tough dynamic, and that creates a lot of work for us in terms of, navigating that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then once COVID came around, I guess, how did that change? I would assume you guys probably had a lot of incoming leads at that point and people looking for solutions, especially these older companies that, had probably never really looked into that as much. And then basically they're sending everybody home. And so I'm curious how that changed how you guys worked. And then looking into the future, do you think you might potentially lose business with people going back into the office? So I'm curious on both of those items.
Yeah. So, COVID was insane, obviously. And it was insane for a lot of companies. I mean, many companies had enormous success, and in different ways too. But specifically for us, obviously, COVID sent everyone home. Zoom all of a sudden became a household name. Like grandma and grandpas were using it to connect with their local churches or their friends or whatever. Everyone was on it. I actually, right before COVID hit, I think we had about like 22 or 24 million average daily users. And 30 days after COVID, we were at like 315 million daily average users. So just like
stock just shoot up too.
Oh yeah. I mean, the stock I don't know what we were at before, but like 100 and something. And then I think we peaked at like 600 something. So just crazy growth. I mean, even to the point where we added, obviously we're a publicly a traded company and we have our guidances and our releases. And I think throughout COVID, we had added an extra $1 billion in estimated revenue that we were going to see throughout the course of the year, which we ended up doing and seeing because of it. And it was insane. I mean, I joined in July, so I was a few months after, but still, even those first 6 or 7 months in 2020 or wrapping up 2020 is chaos. I mean, everyone was just like, hey, all of a sudden, all of my employees are home. I need 100 Zoom licenses like yesterday. And so, yeah, it was just a really fun time. Obviously just things were it was like living in a tornado and everyone was just trying to get a grip on stuff and still provide great customer service. And don't get me wrong, Zoom, we had some growing pains as well. We had a lot of things that we had to figure out. No one was ready to go, 6X in scale over 35 days. But, they did that and they did a good job. Now, post-COVID, yeah, it's interesting because obviously you've got a lot of, there's overall thought of, hey, we want to get back to normal. We want to get people back in the office. I think you see that at the leadership level, not necessarily at the bottom level. I think people really like this whole work-life balance. They like the flexibility. So it's kind of murky in terms of what's going to happen, except I will say Zoom has done a phenomenal job. And hats off to our leadership team and our product team. They've done a great job of positioning ourselves very well for post-COVID, because everyone thinks of us as meetings, right? Video conferencing meetings, but we have such a strong platform play that really enables hybrid work, and we're talking about conference room strategy, workspace reservation. So when I am going to go into the office on Wednesday, I can actually pick what desk I want to be at. And when I get there, I can use my QR code and it's going to sign me into my Zoom profile. I'm going to see all of my chats. I'm going to see my upcoming meetings. I'm going to be able to make phone calls, all of that stuff. We've got Zoom Phone, which is that market itself is like 16 times the size of the video conferencing market. And we're starting to make some serious headwinds in the telephony market. So they've done a really good job. And I think, of course, we'll naturally take some, pushback with people just wanting to get back to normal. But I think after that settles, Zoom's going to continue just to dominate in the market because they're so robust and they've got such a great platform that touches on so many more pieces.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you say phone, do you mean like the full phone service for a business? Like their phone system is run through Zoom?
Yep.
Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah.
So like when somebody calls, XYZ business, when you call them, their phone system is run through Zoom.
Yeah, exactly.
Through like an internet service. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
Voice over IP. And so it's like a soft phone, but it's amazing because one, it's a fraction of the cost. Like usually what like a Verizon bill is, anywhere between $45 and $65, let's say. Zoom Phone, you get unlimited US and Canada calling and SMS for $15, right? So now all of a sudden when you're talking to a CFO, you're like, hey, look, you've got 800 employees and you're paying $60 per employee. I'm going to bring that down to 15, right? You're going to be saving over $1 million a year. The other cool thing is like everyone's already using the Zoom application, right, for video conferencing. So when you turn on phone, all it does is just put a little phone icon in that application. And of course that application works on my, it works on my cell phone and it works on my computer. So if someone calls me, my computer will ring, I'll take the phone call. And the other cool thing too is it's all running on the same architecture. So let's say Jake calls me and he calls my Zoom phone and where he's like, hey, let's actually just jump on a meeting real quick. I don't have to jump off, go schedule and send it, right? I'm going to see a little icon, click video. Now him and I are in a video conferencing call. So it's very powerful. And the other cool thing is, when you're talking to leaders, CTOs, CFOs, CEOs, when you start to consolidate, and this is usually a big value prop for us, it's like, one, we'll save you money. Two, we're going to give you better reliability and quality. But three, we're talking less vendors to work with, right? Less invoices that you have to deal with. Now your end users, rather than going over here to do instant messaging and going over here for email and going over here for video conferencing, and then, I've got my other cell phone. Let's just bring that into one application. Let's do that all in one place. And, less tools to manage, less vendors to work with, less like billing schemes and terms and all of this other nonsense. Put it all on one page, one application. Let's just make everyone's life a lot easier. Oh, and we'll save you money too. So you start to pitch that. And
right.
Like, okay.
Yeah. And that's kind of what Office did, correct? They kind of put everything into one as a package. I guess, does Zoom ever consider doing something like that, rolling out a full platform where basically it's like an Office 365?
I don't know. And I would probably, if I guessed, I would be totally lying because those decisions are way, way, way above my pay grade. I'm just the guy that, presents it and sells it. Obviously, being one platform is all of our discussions right now. Now, obviously, when we say platform, we're talking about video conferencing, phone, and chat, and then conference room technology, which is mainly a day-to-day communications. Like we still use Gmail here at Zoom. I almost never email unless I'm emailing a client who isn't already a contact on my Zoom application. But yeah, I probably couldn't speak if we were going to be rolling out like they obviously have like Office 365, like Excel and Word doc and all these other things. I'm not sure.
Colin, I'd love to touch on your interview with Zoom. I know it was like a pretty drawn out process. And then also coming from Australia, I don't know where the interview was at, but then telling them you want to live in Hawaii. I guess just I'd love for you to tell the interview process, because I think there were some cool stories in there and how like crazy it was, and then moving to Hawaii and how they took that.
Yeah, that was a tough one. It was, I mean, I think it was like 5 rounds over the course of 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, probably 5 weeks. I think I had one each week. And obviously I was in Australia at the time, so time differences are pretty tough. So I'm obviously dealing with, either it's really early morning for me or late in the evening. And then throw in the ludicrous request on my part of being like, hey, yeah, you're going to hire me and I'm going to go to Hawaii. Right. And so I had to combat that. And I did. I got pushback. Like, it was not a smooth process. I probably 3 times throughout the interview process, I thought for sure I lost it. I wasn't going to get hired. I even was on calls with managers, and they're like, hey, we're concerned about this and we're concerned about that. Which, again, kind of going back to what we're talking about, not necessarily a bad thing, because it's like, okay, now I understand what the pain points are, and now I can double down on those pain points. You're concerned about this reason, and here's why I believe that you shouldn't be concerned about it, and here's how I can prove it. And I had some of those. One of them was, I worked at TechTarget, which is a phenomenal company, but it's not necessarily software as a service. They do have a solution now, and they've had it in the market for a while, and that is. But at a high level, they're not viewed as software as a service. So they were like, hey, we're a little bit concerned because you don't necessarily have SaaS selling experience. So I had to combat that. I'm like, no, I know, I understand that, but let me show you why that's not irrelevant and why I could still be a great sales rep for you. And then the Hawaii thing, they were like, that seems a little bizarre. Like, how do we know you're not going to just be down there sipping Mai Tais at 11 a.m. every day and catching a surf, And I'm like, I had to prove that. And there's multiple times where I had to follow up on LinkedIn. I had to follow up on email. I had to get the next interview round booked. I had to get on there and voice the concerns. Be like, I understand that this is why you are a little bit hesitant on hiring me. Let me address this very quickly before we dive into anything else. So it was touch and go, and it was a tough one. I mean, I was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to get this thing. And that was currently our plan, was like, hey, we're going to go to Hawaii. So therefore I need a job. And so I really needed to make it happen. And so I was just doubling down on the processes that we've talked about, and had to just keep reselling myself. And obviously I also had to do like a mock sales presentation where you're trying to sell Zoom and go through the qualification and everything like that, and see if they like your process and how you do it. And then luckily I got the offer and we made it happen. But yeah, I don't know. It was a tough one. It was a doozy.
Why Hawaii? Just because you wanted to?
Yeah. Well, so originally before COVID hit, the plan that Lindsay and I had, my fiance, we were going to both quit our jobs. I'd been in Australia for 3 years at that point. She had been there for about 1.5 years, and we obviously were planning to get engaged, get married, start on that next chapter of life, which is kind of where we're at now. But before all of that happened, we were like, hey, let's fit in like a couple more adventures. And so originally what we were going to do is we were both going to quit our jobs outright. We were going to put $5,000 in separate bank accounts. We were going to pack a book bag, and we were just going to go travel Southeast Asia. Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, everything, Indonesia, and all of that stuff, and just see where it took us. No real agenda, just boom, let's go see what's out there. And that was like the dead set plan. We were starting to build out where we were going to go first and all this other stuff. And then COVID hit, right? And it's like, oh, okay, well, shit, I don't think like going around from country to country is going to be a thing for a long time. And we're like, we're kind of ready to do our next thing. So we basically by default landed on Hawaii. We're like, okay, hey, maybe Hawaii could be another really cool adventure. We had visited Maui the year before and really loved it. And so we were like, let's go make that thing happen. So after we made that decision, then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to need a job. I'm going to need a way to get paid while I'm there. And so then that's what led me to Zoom. And there was a couple other factors that obviously helped. For me, I was like, hey, I think this is a really good opportunity to make this realistic. Pre-COVID, I think if I would have come knocking on the doors of Zoom and been like, hey, I want you to hire me, and this is what I want you to pay me, and I'm going to go to Hawaii, I think they would have been like, see you later, bud, like laughing me out of the door, right? But it was COVID, and now everyone's working from home. Like the whole world's from home. So this whole idea of me being somewhere ludicrous doesn't sound as crazy anymore. And so I just tried to make that happen and then go on that. So yeah, I did Hawaii for about a year and a half and loved it. Every single day was the best.
So is that trip off the table then, or are you guys still going to try to do that at some point?
Yeah, that's if you ask me, yes. And actually, if you ask Lindsay, yes. It's
yes, it's off, or yes, it's on?
Sorry, yes, it's on. I want the trip to happen like tomorrow. I would pack my bags. I'd be out of here. Boom. It's tough because now life is moving really fast. You know, we get married in March. We're back here. The housing market, obviously, you guys are experts in that space. You know what's going on there. It's just insane. So, you know, we're trying to figure all that out. We'd love to acquire a home, like a primary residence, as soon as possible. But yeah, I would still love to go backpack if I could. We also we're super excited to get married and have kids and start our family. And you know, I'll be 30 in May. And so it's like, for me, I'm kind of like, all right, we're kind of starting to get there. I'm like, part of me is like telling me, I'm like, hey, it's time to wrap it up, buddy. You've had some fun for the last few years. Let's do some adult things. But at the same time, I'm like, but there's so much out there I want to go see. So I did tell Lindsay, I was like, hey, look, you know, if we acquire this house, and get moved in, then the first thing I'm doing is signing it up on VRBO and Airbnb. And then I'm going to book that thing for like 2 weeks or for a month. And I'm going to go to Costa Rica, whether you're coming or not. And she would obviously come. She loves to travel. But I'm like, let's get out of here. Let's go check that out and go live the digital nomad life. Even if she's pregnant, like we could still go be there for a few months. Like, why not?
Colin, can you touch real quick on how you and Lindsay met? This is a crazy story there.
Yeah. We met in Croatia. I was with a handful of my buddies. I had left, flew up from Australia. I don't know if you guys have heard of this thing called Yacht Week. It is, if you haven't, look it up. And if you get a chance to do it, you have to do it. It's the best week of my entire life. I also met my soon-to-be wife there, so it's obviously makes it even better. But basically what happens is it's like anywhere between 50 and 100 catamarans and monohull sailboats, and they just sail from island to island. And it's organized, so once you're there, you don't have to do much. But, you know, they're sailing around from island to island. They have parties on every island. You're sailing around the Adriatic Sea. It's just amazing and beautiful. And so I had signed up to do this with my buddies. We're like, hey, let's go. And we had 8 spots on the boat. We filled 5 of them, and then we needed 3 more girls to join. And so we put it up on a Facebook group, you know, hey, looking for a couple of girls to join us. Here's a little bit about us, like blah, 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 blah. And they somehow filled those 2 spots. And then a girl, one of our friends from Germany, joined as well. And so we go. It's like day 1, whatever, everyone's having fun. We just met each other. Day 2, it's like girls pretty cute. I'm like, I think maybe she's kind of got a little crush on me or something. And so we started engaging, you know, and we're having fun. And obviously by the end of, you know, day 7, I'm infatuated with this girl. And I'm like, man, she's like the coolest girl I've ever met. She's beautiful and whatever. And so we leave, and, you know, we had stayed in touch. And she was in Florida. I was actually coming back for your wedding, Jake. So I was actually coming from Croatia to Colorado for you to get married, and was there, and we kept staying in contact. We synced up when we were in the US, and then I went back to Australia, and then she ended up visiting, and then ended up moving, and then we've, you know, the rest is history. We've been together ever since.
Wow. What was she doing in Croatia at the time?
So
just vacation? Yeah,
same thing. She was with her friends, and they were going to do this Yacht Week thing. So just 2 totally separate lives on the same path that just kind of merged in Croatia on a sailboat, you know, going from island to island. And it was the best thing that's ever happened to me.
2023, let's get it booked.
Oh, I'm in. That would be my dream. Yeah, I would go. We were actually, and they do all different locations. You can do Croatia. I think you can do Greece. You can do the British Virgin Islands, which would be an easy one to get from to there from here. And then somewhere else, maybe I don't remember the other one, maybe Indonesia or something like that.
Awesome. Well, I think this has been a great podcast. I know it's been entertaining for me. Drew, you got any final questions before we close this out?
No, that's been great. I guess I'm just curious, what's next for you? I guess you have a long-term vision with Zoom. I'm just curious on what you're thinking.
Yeah. I've got a lot of plans. Jake and I are always, you know, got a meeting of the minds going on whenever we're with each other or over the phone. I've got some short-term goals. I've got some long-term goals. Right now, collectively, Lindsay and I, our biggest goal is to basically use the money that we're making from Zoom and from her job to just buy assets. Like our number one goal is, hey, let's resist the urge of splurging on liabilities and all this other nonsense, and let's just buy real estate. Let's buy. We're doing a couple other investing strategies to basically build up cash flow so that we can break the whole rat race that a lot of us naturally just get stuck in. I think the system naturally builds us, and I know, Drew, you've, through what Jake has shared, has done a phenomenal job of doing that. And so kind of following in those footsteps, say, let's build up our cash flow coming in through our assets so that we could smash this whole rat race. Then whether I need to have a job or not have a job doesn't really matter anymore. Our family's looked after. And then my ultimate goal in life is to build a business or businesses. Like my dream is to own a portfolio of businesses that are doing really cool things that I care about, and really get to that point. And so the immediate goal is spending money on assets so that we could build cash flow, so that we could break the rat race. Then the long-term goal is, hey, let's start executing on some of these ideas so that we could go play in the sand and have fun and see if we can build something really special.
Yeah, that's awesome. We should definitely talk after this as well. I'm sure we could do something together.
Yes, I have heard some really, really interesting ideas. So honestly, yeah, we should, we need to connect and grab a beer or coffee and digest some ideas.
Yeah, for sure. Sure.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, it was great. That was a lot of fun, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.